That way, if you'd like to review it later, you'll have that option. So, welcome to the Quality Online Course Series, Learning Objectives and Assessments. This particular workshop is going to be a deeper dive into Quality Matters Standards 2 and 3. Respectively, that's Learning Objectives and Assessments. My name is Tracy Miller, and I'm the Online Teaching Coordinator in the Faculty Development and Instructional Design Center. I'd like to begin things by asking a couple questions, and again, you can just sort of answer in the text chat area. When you design an online course or any type of course, how do you know what to teach? And I was having a earlier conversation with Jordan, and the answer was that there, you know, whether you're teaching online or face-to-face, you sort of have to know in your design phase what you're going to teach. Course description and learning outcomes setup objectives. Good answer. Often when I sit down with people to design a course, that's one of the first things I ask them for, is if they have a course syllabus, so I can get an idea of what the course is all about and what those learning outcomes, or it's just maybe a different kind of wording, the course objectives. So whenever you start a course design, you need to look at those course objectives. What is your objective? What are you trying to get the students to be able to do, be able to learn in the course? So my second question, and you can just add your multiple choice answer here into the text chat area, is what is the source for your course objectives? Is that something that you write yourself? Is it something that the department mandates? Or perhaps your teaching supervisor would mandate? Do you take them from the textbook or a publisher resource? Are you really not sure where these objectives came from? So any of those answers, and sometimes it's a combination. Jordan says it's a mix of B and C. Yes, LaDonna says B, and I happen to know that from your department that this is sort of decided by a group, and then you are told what your course objectives are going to be. So that's quite typical. And in that case, you may be sort of stuck with the learning objectives that you've been given. And we're going to talk about what a good learning objective is versus what a learning objective that really could be improved would be. So this may give you some ammunition on improving the course objectives that you have been given. But you may already have really good course objectives that will set you up and your students up for success. So how familiar are you with writing objectives? In both cases, it didn't seem like you had the ability to kind of write them yourselves right now, but maybe you have in the past or you've had other experiences with them. So how familiar are you with the writing objectives? Novice. I've heard of them, but I've never learned anything about them. Well, you're in the right place then today. Okay, so here are some examples of what a good learning objective would look like. And I said good one, you know, I think I'm always open for debate. I think things can be improved. But here are some examples. You start with a statement like this: by the end of the course, you will be able to. I just want to look at Ladonna's response. C and B, using SMART to write objectives for other improvements. Yes, SMART is one of those plans that kind of take you through the steps of writing a good objective. The other one I've heard of is called ABC, and you know, Jordan, that might be something that you look up if you want to explore some other methods of writing good learning objectives. So back to my screen though. We're going to break down a bunch of different components and what this, why this is sort of a good learning objective. But a learning objective should be this sort of this idea that by the end of the course, the students will be able to do something. And so by sort of starting with that opening statement, I always find it's sort of easier to write learning objectives. So anything that you are starting with, what are you're thinking about what the student learning objectives are going to be, just starting by this simple phrase always sets me off in the right direction. So write a thematic analysis paper comparing themes in 3 works of fiction. So by the end of this course, the students will be able to write a thematic paper. They'll be able to develop and deliver an organized and effective persuasive speech that uses visual aids. This may not be something that is in the same course, so this is some examples of, you know, a mixture of learning objectives from a variety of courses. The third one is students will be able to draw a well-labeled free body diagram showing all real forces that act on an objective. So there's a lot of information in all of these learning objectives. So we're going to break them down into sort of more bite-sized chunks here. Each learning objective should include some type of behavior or an action verb. That's usually how they start. They would have some conditions. What are the resources or constraints that it kind of focuses the learning objective a little bit. And then the criteria. What degree of performance do they need to do? What degree of performance when they are demonstrating that behavior is going to be important for them to understand in the learning objective. The learning objectives should describe what students will learn. And learn is a hard word to actually measure, but we say it a lot. The students will learn how to do this. The students will learn how to do that. But it's actually in the description of the learning objective of what they will learn. So the first one that we used as an example here, students will be able to write a thematic analysis paper. And so they're going to learn how to do a thematic analysis of 3 works of fiction. And so kind of adding that to the description helps, rather than maybe saying that they will learn how to write a thematic paper. You can kind of just, that's sort of inferred by writing the learning objective this way. So you can see that using those descriptions of what they will be able to learn how to do can be added into the learning objective. This learning objective should be written from the student's perspective. That really gets to the idea of this is what the students will be able to do, But it's more than that because it's also saying it's not something that you as the instructor are going to be doing. Sometimes learning objectives can be written from that perspective. With starts off with something more like, in this course, I will be doing this, because that is what you will be doing, not necessarily what the students will be learning about. So just another good recommendation is to always think about this from the student's perspective. And you can be very intentional and say you will be able to. The other one is to say the students will be able to. And that just helps them recognize that this is their behaviors, their actions that they need to be taking in the course. It also makes them feel like they're part of the course and that they have a sense of belonging within the course. Learning objectives need to be observable. That kind of goes back to what I was saying before about it's really hard to measure students learning something, because it can be really difficult to measure or observe whether they're learning something. And sometimes we just intuitively know it based off of some of their behaviors, but that's really hard to define when you're writing a learning objective. So it needs to start with that action verb that's going to be observable in some way. And so in this case, we can observe through their written work. We can observe through the development and the delivery of a speech, and we can definitely observe something that they've drawn out or modeled for us. So using those action verbs really helps make things seem observable. And, you know, we were just talking about things being measurable. What do we mean by measurable, and what's that level of competency that we're looking for when we are talking about learning objectives? And so in this case, we've highlighted where we think that the learning objectives could be measurable and at what level, what condition we're looking for, what criteria we're looking for that we talked about a few slides ago. And so in this case, we're measuring a paper that is based off of comparing themes in 3 specific works of fiction. So we're going to be measuring them on how well they're comparing them. Are they using 3 works of fiction, or did they only use 2 works of fiction? You know, we're being really specific about how we're going to measure their success and demonstrating how they are meeting these learning objectives. And again, just using sort of some of these different examples. In the second one, they're delivering a persuasive speech, but we also want to see how they perform at using visual aids. Some of these details really define these learning objectives. We also want to make sure that the learning objectives are appropriate for the level of the course. And that can be, you know, you definitely want to be sort of that subject matter expert in order to identify that the learning objectives are suitable for a certain level of course. So I want to throw out another idea of pick any of these learning objectives that we've been sort of dissecting and kind of guess what level course this would be. You know, would this be a 300, 400 level course? Is this more of a graduate school level course? What do you think? And when you add it to the text chat area, if you could just add that action verb at the beginning and then what level you think it might be. Jordan thinks the comparing themes might be a 200 level course. I'm not going to argue with that. It sounds like that was a pretty good guess. I could see where this might not be an introductory course. Introductory may be maybe a little bit less analysis in comparing. Yeah, and let me just throw out my idea here of the third one. Well, maybe a basic level anatomy class or engineering class might want a well-labeled diagram of something. It might become more complicated when you start thinking about all the different forces that might act on an object. So that might creep up the level of complexity, maybe drive up the level of the course a little bit more. LaDonna finds that all three of them may be a 200 level course. Yes, it definitely could be. I kind of argued that third one might be a higher level thinking, but that also may depend on whether it's a course that's involved with a certain program, and that makes it a little bit more intense for all the students. But it definitely kind of takes that subject matter expert to determine the appropriate level for a course. But it does make you stop and think about it a little bit. So, quality online course design. We've been talking a lot about course level objectives, and now we're going to talk a little bit more about module level objectives. And we're going to talk about what that means. But the great thing about module level objectives is even if we are mandated the course level objectives, we often have the freedom to create our own module level objectives. And so that's where all of these suggestions and all these strategies, are still useful even if you are sort of mandated the course level objectives. So what are module level objectives? Well, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what I mean by a module. So that's just a term that we use to encapsulate a lot of different ideas. Things could be broken down, chunked up in an online course by the module. Sometimes a module might be a weekly module. So you're going to break all the content into weekly segments. You may make modules more than 1 week depending on how expansive they are. And so you're not going to really break them down by week, and you're going to actually call them modules and define how many, what the amount of time it's going to take to cover a module is. You can also define modules by topics, and so any of these things really work, but we're just going to talk about them, how we chunk up our course, and we're going to use the word module for now. But modules are the more granular or detailed pieces of a course objective. And so we're already talking about how we're kind of chunking up the course. Course objectives, you may have maybe 5 to 7 different course level objectives, and you're going to be kind of, addressing those course level objectives in a more granular way throughout the modules. So that's sort of the difference. The modules are going to be often sequenced for increasing levels of mastery. So you might start with the building blocks that are going to increase over the time of the course until they can kind of master those course level objectives. But they really need to support those course objectives because that's what it's all about. You're doing all this in order for the students, again, to be successful by the end of the course, to be able to do different things. So how can we align our module level objectives with our course level objectives. And alignment is an important concept when we're designing an online course. And I know LaDonna knows this because she's been to our Applying the Quality Matters rubric all-day workshop. So I'm going to talk about alignment here. We want to kind of ensure that those module level objectives somehow support the course level objectives, that somehow they fit together with the course level objectives. And then we also want to share with our students how they align. And so in that way, we're going to create a map of the course in order to kind of prove that alignment is happening. And so this is what the strategy that I like to use to make sure that my module level objectives are aligning with our the course level objectives. So I've created this table, and across the top is the course level objectives for a research course. And so you're explaining the different roles of evaluation, you're explaining evaluation methodologies, and you're applying them to authentic situations, and then you're creating a program evaluation. And so this is, like I said, it's a research class, but it's all about how you would evaluate the quality of your research. So again, the course level objectives are across the top. And down the first column here are some module level objectives, and we followed the same rules to write them. So we're starting with an action verb. We're making sure that we've added those conditions and those criteria and those other elements. We find that they're an appropriate level for the student. And you can start with that phrase when you write a module level objective, that we started with our course level objective, only you just tweak the language a little bit. So you could say, by the end of this module, you will be able to explore the logic of program evaluation. By the end of this module, you will be able to define the purposes of program evaluation. And so then again, we want to make sure that they align with the course level objectives. So we're just filling in these boxes to make sure that the module level objectives not only align with the course level objectives, but we're not leaving any gaps. We're not never addressing a certain course level objective, or we don't have module level objectives that don't align to any of the course level objectives. And by creating this map for your students and really creating this map for yourself, you're making sure that there is no gaps in your alignment between the module level and course level objectives. I'm going to take like just a breath, so I want to see if you have any questions on this idea of how you align your module level objectives with your course level objectives. And if you're typing in there, go ahead, but I will tell you that just as a practical strategy, after I complete this sort of map of how they align, when I add content into my online course and I'm describing a module to the students, I'll tell them what the module level objectives are, and then right after that, in parentheses, I will add, this aligns with course objective 1 to 5. Whatever they actually happen to align to. And then sometimes I'll even use sort of a shortcut nomenclature where I'll say, just in parentheses, for instance, if I was to say, this week in Module 3, we will be reading this, we'll be doing this, but you will be able to identify examples of formation and summative evaluation, and that aligns with being able to explain various evaluation methodologies. And so I'll make that connection between the two, hopefully really obvious to the students, and that will show relevancy. I want to pop over to the text chat area. Jordan says, so you would outline course objectives and module objectives in the syllabus, or just the course objectives? That's a really good question. And my answer is that the course level objectives, I think, are very important to add to the syllabus. Where I would add the module level objectives or this sort of table would be in the Blackboard course under like information. And so that way your syllabus doesn't sort of get really long and so long that nobody's really inspired to read it, but that information is readily available in the Blackboard course. Good, I'm glad. And I know because you teach primarily face-to-face, but you'd like to use Blackboard, this would actually be a really good way for you to do that, because your students would be able to refer to that easily in the Blackboard course. So I can't believe that it's 12:31 and I am like exactly halfway through where I want to be. So I'm feeling good with my pacing. Um, I'm going to wrap this up because I talked about at the very beginning that this aligns with the Quality Matters standards for online course design. And so there are several specific review standards. So in some ways you can think of that as substandards to what Quality Matters says about quality course design. But I'm going to wrap it up all in this one big sentence. So quality courses have measurable course objectives, which are consistent with the module level objectives. They are written from the learner perspective. They're clearly related to the course activities and are suited to the level of the course. So if you follow sort of these strategies and the best practices, you should be well on your way to having a recognized quality course. But we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about assessments now. So assessments in a quality online course measure your course objectives. We talked about this a lot with both course and module level objectives. They need to be observable and they need to be measurable, and the assessments are going to be what accomplishes that. So if you could tell me in the text chat area, what is your favorite assessment and why do you use it? What is that assessment that you just know that after the students complete it, you can definitely tell that they have accomplished your objectives? And while you're typing, I'll actually share a story with you that happened in my course this week. I wanted the students to be able to apply social bookmarking methods to their research. And I have to be honest with you, I know that several of them did not measure up. They did not understand the concept of social bookmarking. So that was my clue to be way more intentional on how I was going to deliver that concept. So I guess I'm saying that was not my favorite assessment. Too revealing. Well, and I will share with you the answer. I do feel like there's a very strong correct answer in this case, and it's the answer of why you would use it. And that's because it directly measures the course objectives. LaDonna says, for my course, it is a SOAP assignment. It represents case study documentation, simulation of practice experience. Right, so I love practice experiences. We're actually going to talk about them a little bit. You know, you can tell, do they get it or don't they? So really good example. We talked about alignment between the course level and the module level objectives. So the assessment needs to align with the learning objectives. And I'm going to show you another map about how you can kind of accomplish that. But I also want to say that the assessments also need to align with the learning materials, the course activities, and the course activities. It all really does need to be able to sync up. I'm sure that in LaDonna's example about representing the case study documentation, though that learning material, that case study that you're providing for them is, you know, I can already tell that it aligns very well with the assessment because, you know, it's all very connected in your description that you have here. Jordan said, for 2006, we assign cases that have students utilize a company's financial annual report. Ask students to apply the concepts learned in class. So again, you're having your course materials might be those companies' annual reports, and you're asking them to apply what they learned, you know, into their assessment. I like both of those examples. And I hope you both have learning objectives that align with those. So here's another map on how I think it's a very practical way to make sure that your assessments are aligning with your learning objectives. And again, we have the course learning objectives across the top from our example before. And we have some assessments that are in this column 1. And so these are assessments. Some of them are sort of activity focused, such as a discussion board. But each of these assessments that have been planned, have been designed into the course, again, making sure that they connect somehow with those course level objectives. And so as part of this activity, again, I've just sort of made a check mark next to how I think they align. And again, I'm looking for gaps. So I want to make sure that all of the course level objectives have some sort of assessment that will help me measure their success in the course. And in some cases, I also like to have a few different assessments that will help measure the course learning objectives. That way I can assess them multiple times. And then some assessments measure more than others. So in this case, the program prospectus that the students do will actually address each of the course level objectives. So that's, you know, that's telling. That's probably something that is going to be kind of a heavy assessment that's going to take the students a lot of time to complete. It may happen in phases. Something like a program prospectus might have an outline to begin with. It may have a first draft and then a final draft. And, you know, it really just shows the importance here of this particular assessment because it addresses so many different learning objectives. But again, this table is helpful for the students to understand how it connects, but also it helps you identify any gaps. sorry for that pause. I just saved you all from a huge cough I had in here from a dry throat. But again, we're looking for those gaps. If we do find that there is a learning objective that is not being assessed, we need to think about that. And then if we have a favorite assessment, which is one of the things that we were just talking about, if we have that favorite assessment and we're not finding that it aligns with one of our objective, whether it be at the course level or the module level, if it's one of our favorites and we find that it's important enough, that may mean that it needs an objective. So the next slide I want to talk about is this idea of power of multiple measurements. And I said that, you know, it was good to notice that there were several check marks for different things. And here's some of the reasons why. First of all, this will give the students multiple ways to demonstrate their understanding. In the perspectives example, I feel another cough coming on, hold on. Sorry about that. In the perspectives example that I was using, you know, I said that there may be different ways that through phases that the students can demonstrate their understanding. That also ties in with my next bullet point here, which is frequent feedback. If the students have multiple ways that you can measure their understanding of something, there are times that you can provide them with feedback for them to continue to improve their work and to benefit from your feedback. So for instance, if you give them feedback and there's only sort of one assessment that deals with an objective, your feedback could possibly only be helpful to a future course. So having opportunities for frequent feedback is important. It also can allow you to sequence it to those higher orders of thinking. So going back to our example of a persuasive speech using visual skills, you know, again, maybe we're starting with that outline, and then a little bit further down, we're having them discuss the importance of visual aids, and then we're finally bringing it all together, you know, with this persuasive speech. So allowing them to have multiple ways you're measuring them is going to be good for sequencing. It's also going to be good for active or experiential learning. And this gets back to really both of your favorite assessments really seemed active and experiential to me because of, you know, the words like a practice experience and using sort of a real company's financial annual report. This means that students are really going to be able to do something, and you know, allowing them to do it perhaps several times is again this power of multiple measurements. So if they were to do a simulation and practice the experience several times, you know, you're going to see improvement in that area, hopefully. So some other kind of tips and best practices when you're designing assessments for your online course is to let them know what your grading policy is. This is another one, Jordan, that would be beneficial to add into your Blackboard course, even if you had added it to a syllabus or if you had gone over it in class. And that's begin by explaining to the students how their grades are being calculated and if there's a relationship between percentages, how you're weighting the grades, is there are you using a higher weight for tests versus quizzes, or are you defining it more by a point value, for instance, a test being 100 points and a quiz being 10 points? Whatever you can let them know how you are calculating that grade is, again, usually pretty good in the syllabus, but any way you can explain it also in the online environment, I think, is something that they'll refer back to and sort of look through. Sorry, I just got an appointment update. Next, to let the students know right up front how many assignments they will have and if they're in particular different categories. Same idea, you can add it to your Blackboard site, or you can add it to the syllabus. Sometimes we don't let them see all of the assignments in which they could actually submit their assignments up front, but letting them know how many they are, what the due dates are, what kind of category they're in, really helps the students. And that's something that you could do in your design phase. So as you're planning the course. Also let them know what your policy is on late submissions. And your policy can be anything that you would find beneficial to the students. So whether you're not accepting late submissions at all, or whether you're going to be knocking points off at a certain point for late assignments, just let them know what that is. Again, because they're not necessarily seeing you face to face, twice a week, whatever the frequency of the course is, it's important that they know that you do have policies on submissions of late work. So just state it, again, in the syllabus, in the Blackboard course is great. And then what is the criteria? What are your expectations when you're going to be evaluating their work? Are you going to use rubrics? Are you going to share exemplars with the students? And then also, what is the point value for the individual pieces of work, but also maybe for any kind of category of work that you have. So maybe the total point value for all of the quizzes. I actually think a little bit about the course I'm teaching right now. There is a journal that we're using, a reflective journal, and each week the journal entry is worth 5 points. The journal itself, over the duration of the course, will be worth 80 points. And so I want them to know that even though 5 points doesn't seem like a big deal week to week, it's important over the course, over the duration of the course. So any kind of expectations that you can give to your students, plan for that at a time and communicate with that information to your students. Next, feedback. I talked about the importance of frequent feedback. And so you need to sort of think about the types of feedback that you're going to give your students and when you're going to give that to them. And so I'm gonna pull up another table in just a minute here to give you some ideas on how to do that. But how do you give your students feedback currently in your course? When entering grades in Blackboard, enter comments for each assignment. Yes, and grades themselves are feedback, right? But I love the idea of adding comments also, because then you're being much more specific about that. So in the design phase, though, Jordan, have you thought about entering grades and comments for each assignment? What kind of plans are you making for that? And while you're thinking about that, LaDonna says, I like to be interactive during the week and give individual feedback with grades. So you may be even interactive within some of the other places like a discussion board. Okay, Jordan says, not on each assignment, usually quizzes. I let them know what areas to focus on for the exam. I like that example. So to kind of pull that out from what I'm thinking of, you are planning on giving them feedback on what they can focus on for exams on quizzes. And so that's sort of your planning phase. LaDonna says we have weekly discussions because you teach online. Yes, so you're giving them feedback in the discussion boards for sure. So let me show you how you can kind of map out this feedback loop. Again, how you're going to sort of plan your feedback, and think about planning as being something that happens before the course. So if you're teaching right now and you're thinking about making some revisions to the course for the spring, maybe you found that you weren't able to deliver the feedback the way you want. Think about your planning now and making maybe some refinements going forward. So I've made another table. I've got my assessments, the same assessments that we were working with earlier in the first column, but I'm thinking about feedback in a variety of ways here. First, instructor feedback. How do I plan on providing my students with feedback? How are the students going to interact with each other? Are they going to have opportunities to give each other feedback? Do they have opportunities to do a self-check where they're going to be, again, maybe reflective, like I was talking about with a reflective journal? And I'll talk about adaptive technology in just a minute. But in my planning, I'm thinking that I'm going to be giving students feedback when I grade their assignments and adding adding comments to the different bodies of work that they're completing and these different assessments that I've added the X's to. For the discussion board, I'm going to make the focus a little bit more student to student because they are going to be replying to each other. They're going to have more of an opportunity to give each other some constructive feedback, some challenging questions. I often tell my students that they need to be thought-provoking and challenging in their replies on the discussion board. Again, this is just X marks that I've made. There may be times where you're going to have them interact in a different way. Jordan, in your example with the quizzes, obviously that's not going to be a student-to-student interaction way for the students to give each other feedback, but maybe you can have them do a self-check in that instance where you're going to have them maybe take the quiz a couple of times so they can see your comments and make improvements the second time they do the quiz. So again, these check marks are just examples for you. But the table itself is something that you can use to kind of plan out how feedback will happen in your course. So I said I was going to talk about the adaptive technology a little bit in this logic model assessment that I have here. When I grade the different phases of the logic model, of course, I'm going to grade it and give comments. I may actually ask the students to reflect on how they thought the logic model process went. If I've used some sort of other technology, and what I mean by that is there might be some kind of program that's already been created by more of an e-learning author that will adapt to the kind of responses that the students make. Maybe it will automatically, there's kind of this automated response to tell them to review a certain kind of content or something, or maybe it's going to adapt based off of the answers that they give. Maybe it's going to make it more complex because they seem to be really grasping the concepts, or maybe it's going to send them to sort of a lower level in order to, again, scaffold up to a certain level. That's kind of a kind of out there technology that you may not be using, or may not even be appropriate to your discipline. But I like to throw it out there too, because it's almost like a robot is giving them some sort of feedback. So we're actually in our last 5 minutes together, and I'm going to wrap up assessments by this ginormous sentence again that just links it to what Quality Matters says about course design. And quality courses have multiple and varied assessments that measure course and module level learning objectives. They have a clear grading policy that includes descriptive criteria for evaluation, or how you're going to grade your students, and opportunities for students to track their progress. And a lot of that's through seeing their grades and seeing the feedback that you and everyone else provides them in the course. In summary, to just wrap up the two components of this workshop, quality online courses start with strong course and module objectives. The objectives should be student-centered, observable, and measurable. So if we go back to the first half of the workshop, that's a lot of what we talked about. The assessment should align with the objectives. Expectations and grading policies should be clearly defined. Whether you're using Blackboard for a completely online course, or using it to enhance a face-to-face course. Students should receive frequent feedback on progress. So that's why it's important to plan and design that into your online course. Oh, I've got Stephanie up in there from an old version of this, but you are certainly welcome to reach out to either of us if you have more questions on quality online course design, or specific to learning objectives or assessments. Here is our contact information, our email addresses. Again, we're happy to answer any questions that you have on that. I'm going to stop the